So which units have Warhammer 40k collectors out there most been choosing to add to their collections in 2024? Time for a countdown of the model soldiers, tanks and monsters that have been selling in the greatest numbers this year. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking about Warhammer 40k sales once more, with some interesting trends in the data of several thousand Warhammer sales. I've covered this topic a few times in the past on the channel, so this one's a bit of an update. Perhaps I'm just a little bit overly interested as to which models are selling well for Games Workshop, as a slightly unusual insight as to the thoughts of hobbyists, as quite a lot of the time there's model kits that are overemphasized, but when you think about it, you can see why players of that particular faction might be adding that model at this time. Sometimes it's model look and rule of cool, but it often goes hand in hand with in-game rules. As with previous videos I've done in a similar style, the data for this one was provided by Wargame Portal, the discount Warhammer shop in the USA that does 15% off Games Workshop's miniatures, including things like Games Workshop's online-only deals, which often aren't quite so easy to find elsewhere. If you did want to check them out, they're linked down in the video description, and as ever with them, a portion of anything bought through the affiliate link does go to help support Auspex Tactics and keep the videos coming, so I kind of put them down as the video sponsor for this one, both with helping the channel out and also providing the info for the video. As a result, this one's going essentially for info via proxy, using some local gaming store data to infer sales for Games Workshop at large, and really is quite a lot of data of 4,000 individual Warhammer sales over the year. Though for the purposes of this video to look at best-selling Warhammer units, I am going to look at anything that didn't actually release this year, so more sort of background sales for units for various armies, as opposed to new releases which almost always make a big bang just because people want the models. I feel like the data's a little bit harder to gather for new releases, unless you go for surveys and things, given that they're a bit more dependent on how many Games Workshop choose to dispense or how many they've made, and that might limit the amount that they sell. In any case though, with this amount of data available, it can give us a few insights as to what people are picking up. In any case, let's jump into it, and for this one I thought that we'd go through the top 30 best-selling kits, though at a fairly rapid pace. In 30th we have the Space Marine Inceptors, which are down 16 places since last time. Basically they did drop off a bit after they went from the utterly auto-include 110 points for a 3-inch deep strike unit, all the way up to 130, where they're a lot more borderline as to how good they are. They very much felt like a unit that probably sold in huge amounts towards the start of 2024, a bit less so now, and there won't really have been much time for post-balance status late things to change people's mind, dropping down a bit to 120 points, but also losing the 3-inch drop for a 6-inch one. Next up, and not previously on this list before, were the stealth suits. I guess the updated Tau Codex making its presence felt here. The way that Games Workshop wrote the Tau rules meant that they're sort of essential to allowing your units to deal good damage, as the reroll ones to hit and wound for their marker-like guiding. It's just kind of too much to pass up versus the other options out there, and it means that every strong Tau list basically starts with 3 units of 3 stealth suits, which maybe isn't the best triumph of internal balance there. That did feel like a weird decision, but it certainly seems effective in getting people to pick up these models, and they are quite old miniatures as well. I do kind of wonder that if they do go about updating Tau things, whether or not they could have the stealth suits as a potential option for new ones. At number 28 we have the Infiltrators, again previously not on the list. These sneaky Phobos Space Marines can also build in cursors, though I feel like they have really been selling for the Infiltrator unit itself. Again, they've been a unit that's in almost every competitive Space Marine list for quite a while, often with just one squad of 5 of them camping the homeboard objective and stopping anyone doing some sneaky deep strike shenanigans into the backfield. It's perhaps more of a big deal against 3-inch drop armies, and they have been toned down a bit in the latest data slate, though it's still going to be really quite powerful just against deep strike in general and stopping people getting into your backfield quite as easy, and they can have a bit of dual use with some infiltrating into the midboard if you're not against enemy reserves. I've seen a few people thinking about swapping some out for some intercessors potentially. I feel like their massive damage boost certainly increased the competition for the Space Marine objective support sort of role. Next up we've got the Chaos Land Raider, which was a bit higher last time around. It's dropped 7 places here. 10th edition does really feel like it's been the edition of triumph for the Land Raiders. They just had rules that were pretty non-functional in 8th and 9th edition, just not really working due to being a big investment unit that could get ruined by being tagged in combat. The combination of big guns never tire and their assault ramp keyword made them not care so much about being tagged in melee, and also makes them actually legitimately function as a big investment transport. I do kind of wonder if the Chaos Land Raider might have been partly used and cannibalised for loyalists to use them though. There was a supply shortage of Land Raiders when 10th edition came out and they sold out quite quickly, and in general they've tended to be a much more of a staple in loyalist lists versus Chaos. I wouldn't be too surprised if at least some of these sales came from loyalist Land Raiders. At 26 we have the Black Templar Sword Brethren, kind of unchanged since last time, just dropping 2 places. They've been a really popular and dangerous unit for the Black Templars over the edition, particularly in combination with Helbrex or an Emperor's Champion. They can absolutely wreck in close combat. As it goes, they're kind of alright points per dollar for Space Marines as well. I've often been running multiple squads of 5 of them, maybe jumping out of Impulsors. And just in general, I feel like they're really quite fun Space Marine veterans, pretty nice to have just from a looks and collecting point of view. Next up in number 25 we have the Lehman Russ Battle Tank, again previously not on the list before so has risen up a bit. They're the staple guard workhorse pretty much, big damage dealers, and got significantly better after the change to Born Soldiers halfway through the year. Being able to move around and still get lethal hits against monsters and vehicles made them really nasty against taking out the enemy tough stuff. Tank commanders with demolisher cannons and maybe multi-melters have been a staple pretty much the entire time, and other variants like the Lehman Russ Battle Tank with its rerolls is nice to buff, the Exterminator can give you extra AP, and Vanquishers are kind of fun. Plus they're a unit that you can have as lots of them in an army and it won't be a wrong choice, and then I guess multiply all that with Guard being a pretty popular faction. Maybe there's a little bit of hype with people getting some Kriegsmen built up ahead of the big release for them as well. In number 24 we have the Redemptor Dreadnought, again previously not on the list so has risen up a fair bit. They're the big and chunky and fairly iconic Primaris Dreadnought, and again generally for most of 10th they've been a choice that's never really a particularly bad one for Space Marines. Very tanky with their -1 damage, a good user of Armour of Contempt, general purpose damage output with that macroplasma that can at least threaten big stuff even if it's not really going to be all that exciting, and does enjoy certain lists, getting a lot out of Ironstorm though is kind of good in Gladius as well. I feel like when people think Space Marines, Dreadnoughts are one of the staple archetypes for them as well. I'm not surprised that a few people are adding one, and I guess quite a lot of people might have been jumping into Space Marines with the release of Space Marine 2 as well, and one of these certainly had a starring role fly swatting a Helldrake halfway through. I kind of wonder if that had any impact on a few people picking one up. Next up we've got the Necrons Immortals and Deathmarks kit. That was nowhere near quite as high up as it was. I guess the Necron Codex came out towards the end of 2023, so there's a bit of a surge in interest of them at the start of the year, and probably doesn't hurt too much that Necrons in general have been a pretty powerful faction in 40k pretty much ever since. That doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon with the advent of the Star Shatter either. In pretty much all their forms though, Immortals have at least been a pretty interesting unit. If you actually want to deal damage and things, then they seem to be the choice to go for more so than Warriors. They've been pretty nice in Awakened Dynasty, Hypercrypt Legion, and even the Canoptech Court initially with some Cryptek synergies, and they are the sort of unit that you could easily buy multiple of as well if you wanted to say field 2 squads of 10 of them, you need 4 sets. Their counterpart build, the Deathmarks, have been rather good as well, perhaps particularly for Hypercrypt as cheap objective droppers with Deep Strike that can actually do a little bit of damage with their nice sniper rifles. So again, I suppose another good reason to pick up this kit, and Necrons are a popular faction too. Next up, and in at 22nd, is a bit of a surprise in the Phobos Librarian. He previously didn't feature on the list, and I feel like he's a model that doesn't really have a particularly good meta reason to be featured this high, other than Space Marines are popular, and he's quite a fun miniature in the range. I guess he's usable enough with a squad of Infiltrators or maybe Eliminators in a pinch. Being able to make them immune to long-range firepower is kind of cool, even if it does make his squad fairly pricey. Seems that there's a fair bit of love for the shadowy Space Marine Scout Psyker though. Next up for the Dark Angels we have Grandmaster Azrael himself. He's dropped down a little bit from 6 places since last time. It's easy to see why quite so many people have been picking him up though. Dark Angels got their range refresh early in 2024. He's been an absolute staple unit right from the start all the way to now. Just really good value for his points cost, giving you a command point a turn, sustained hits and an invulnerable save, and some fairly good melee stats to boot. With Deathwing Knights and Inner Circle Companions and Lionel Johnson last year, Dark Angels got a massive surge of popularity compared with where they were before, and Azrael feels like the sort of somewhat recent miniature that a lot of people might not have gotten round to adding to their collection yet, given that he came out in Arcs of Omen but was rather overshadowed by the Lion. Interesting that more people seem to have bought him versus Lionel Johnson as well. It feels like the sort of thing where you'd probably have both if you were Dark Angels. Maybe more people got the Lion at the time though. Into the top 20, and next up we have the Orc Killer Cans. These ones dropped 12 places since I last made a version of this video. Short and stompy Gretchen piloted walkers with all manner of saw blades, claws and a few big guns. These look like they had a real surge of popularity when the Orc Codex came out, particularly as they're one of the staple units for the Dread Mob and can make quite good use of its fun damage dealing rules with a bunch of rockets and saws. On top of that, again, they're a kit that could be run in numbers. You could have up to 18 in a Dread Mob list, and it probably wouldn't be the single worst choice in the world, even if they don't really seem to be top tier competitive for the most part. Given they've dropped down quite so far though, it does feel like they had a massive spike in popularity just after the codex came out and then have died off a bit since. Next up we have the Space Marine Vanguard Task Force. This one's the Phobos one that used to be the old Combat Patrol set and initially came out in the Shadow Spear box. And given the state of the 10th edition Combat Patrols, I feel like it's starting to look better and better in comparison, particularly as it is a bit cheaper than most of the Combat Patrols out there. It is the only place to get your hands on the Primaris Suppressors proper models if you want them. The Infiltrators have generally been pretty good in game, as mentioned. The Eliminators just tend to be popular models in general. And it's also got a unique Lieutenant sculpt too. As it goes, it seems a fair few Space Marine collectors have been using this to add a Phobos wing to their army, and it does feel like it's a reasonable enough expansion that could apply to a bunch of chapters out there. That might just be a little bit overstated in this particular dataset, given that Wargame Portal is one of the few places that does them at 15% discount. A lot of other stores don't have that for the online-only deals. Next up, we've got some Tyranids in the Toxicrene and Maliceptor kit. I have a suspicion that this one's been selling for the Maliceptor as opposed to the Toxicrene, and the Maliceptor has been a pretty popular frontline brain bug in 10th edition, a good amount of durability with its invulnerable save, some fairly nasty psychic shooting, and can be good to provide a little bit of synapse to the front line if that's what you need. Tyranids have understandably been pretty popular in general since Leviathan, lots of new collectors for that particular army. Sticking with the bugs from beyond the galaxy, we've also got the Biovore and Pyrovore kit. That's dropped 6 places compared with last time. This one's a fairly recent sculpt model from the start of 10th edition, so not all that many people would have had those sculpts when the codex came out. I'm maybe not too surprised to see this dropping off slightly though. I suspect it was very highly ranked from the start of the year, where until the big summer balanced data slate, literally every Tyranid list tended to run at least one of these, as it meant that you could just auto-complete a bunch of secondary objectives, though it does still seem that since then they're still really quite viable. You can have one take up a space in your deployment zone, and the spawn-to-spore mines still have a lot of worth, being able to screen places and still do certain board positioning secondaries like engage on all fronts. The Pyrovores have also been usable enough as well, often used as small skirmishing units with a fairly cheap points cost. The Games Workshop did up them very slightly recently. I guess they might have a bit of draw to Assimilation Swarm, as they're one of those units if you want to try and run that. Next up, we've got the Canoptek Wraiths, which dropped down a big 14 places since last time. When I made the last video for this kind of mid-year, they were the second most bought model kit, pretty much going through a fairly perfect storm for being popular, given that not many people have picked them up while people got into Necrons in 9th edition. They tended to be kind of mid to bad for most of that, and then suddenly with the 10th edition Necron Codex, all of a sudden they got great. Technomancers being able to join them and give them a 5+ feel no pain, and a powerful Canoptek Court formation to make them work. When the Canoptek Court was the meta Necron list, you could very easily run 18 of them and it wouldn't have been a bad idea, and they bounced in and out of stock a few times as a result at the start of the year. At the same time though, I'm really not too surprised that they've dropped off in a huge way since last time. Games Workshop slapped up the points cost on these guys a couple of times, the same with the Technomancer, and also hit Canoptek Court with nerfs, and between all that it's rather fallen out of favour, and Wraiths too. They're not unusable, but certainly not a unit people are rushing out to buy at the moment. Next up, and for our third Tyranid, we've got the Auspex and Exocrine kit. That one's gained 3 places since last time, so becoming more popular if anything. These ones have generally been absolute staples of damage dealing for the Tyranid since the start of 10th edition, perhaps the Exocrine more so than the Auspex. The Auspex can still hit pretty hard in close combat. Exocrine firepower is just really quite nasty, with a bunch of high AP damage 3 shots. Really good against elite infantry and punchy enough to threaten vehicles, particularly with the Hive Tyrant lethal hits aura that he can give them, or potentially the same from invasion fleets. As a result, they've tended to be in near auto-include status for Tyranid damage dealers, as they just haven't really had all that many mainline things that can actually deal with enemy big things with tough saves, and the boost to having them go to strength 9 probably didn't hurt either in the summer update. In at number 14, and we've got the Chaos Rhino. I guess this guy's been just particularly popular given that it's relevant to so many Chaos factions out there. Has generally been the go-to transport over the Chaos Land Raider for all manner of elite damage dealers. It's nice for Death Guard Plague Marines plus their attached characters to get where they need to be. Good for the Chaos Space Marine Chosen or Legionaries with Lords attached. World Eaters Khorne Berserkers will enjoy, and maybe occasionally Rubik Marines acting as a battlefield taxi for them. As a result, it's maybe not too surprising to see this one being pretty popular. In 13th, then we've got the Honoured of the Chapter set. Again, I previously didn't include this one, as it might be a touch overstated at Wargame Portal due to the discount on online-only deals. I think the fact that it seems to be selling rather well for them is kind of interesting. This one's basically priced the same as a Warhammer Combat Patrol set, though is unusually character heavy. At least in theory land, it could offer a discount versus the characters if Games Workshop sold them separately, say having the Blade Guard Ancient as its own £20 or $35 character kit or something, along with the Judaseer and the Chaplain. And it's packaged with the Eradicators and the Blade Guard set that came with Indomitus. I feel like the biggest draw to the set is probably that Judaseer, as it's the only place that you can get the official model right now, and he has been an interesting unit for a bunch of Space Marine armies, maybe in particular the Dark Angels Inner Circle Companions, where having fights first on them can be very intimidating. He can be quite nice for Black Templar Sword Brethren too. It still doesn't really feel like the most feel-good kit at that kind of price for literally 9 Space Marines though, even if 3 of them are characters that Games Workshop would certainly charge a lot for if sold separately. Next up, we've got the standard Space Marine Terminator squad, rising up from previously not being on the list, maybe people being interested enough to add more after a few recent points drops or something, or supplies of Leviathan going away. I suspect for these guys it's mainly the models themselves that are selling them as opposed to the in-game rules. They were just incredibly well received at the start of 10th edition, loads of people were tempted to get their hands on some. I'm sure a good number of people are happy to expand their Leviathan squads with another reinforcement set of 5 of them, with a few of the other fun options like the Cyclone missile launcher. I'd guess there'd be a good amount of demand for Dark Angels players as well, using them as Deathwing. Next up, we've got the Space Wolf Thunderwolf Cavalry. These ones have dropped down to 11th place, down 7 places on last time, and certainly the most selling Space Wolf kits by quite a long way. It is kind of impressive for them to be ranking quite this high, given that Space Wolves are a fairly niche faction as play rate goes. I think potentially a fair bunch of people might be holding off until they get a range update, which is at least loosely expected somewhat soon. But at least for a good chunk of 2024, if you wanted to play Space Wolves with a strong army list, a lot of players were running a ridiculous amount of Thunderwolves. You would happily run army lists with basically 24 Thunderwolves in them if you really wanted to, with 3 units of 6 maxed out with 2 attached characters each. It is definitely interesting to see some slightly older Firstborn miniatures, though really quite fun ones, ranking quite so high. Definitely feels like gameplay is driving sales there, though at the same time I'm not too surprised to see them dropping off a bit more in the second half of the year. The Champions of Rust attachment got a lot more interesting and viable, so you could do things other ways if you wanted to. I just hope that these aren't one of the units that Games Workshop decides to send to Legends when Games Workshop does the new Space Wolf Codex. That would disappoint quite a lot of people who've picked them up. At number 10, we've got the Primaris Tech Marine, who dropped 4 places since the last time round. He feels like a model that quite a lot of Space Marine players might have used if they wanted to run a Ironstorm list. It's fairly easy to slot into any one Space Marine army if you want to. If you've got a couple of big scary tanks and vehicles, then having a Tech Marine isn't the worst idea in the world, and seems to have tempted a fair few people who didn't have one in previous editions to pick one up. If you did want to make Ironstorm work though, they were kind of essential, and in general you'd probably want to have multiples of them. At number 9, the Jump Intercessors have had a bit of a surge in popularity since I last made the version of this video. A pretty recent model kit as basically the new style Space Marine Assault Marines, and they've been really quite an efficient and powerful unit throughout 10th edition so far, really quite cheap and effective with good damage for what they do. I would have rated them as one of the most auto-include units to have a unit or 2 of them deep strike year round and being a good secondary objective unit that can also hit kind of hard. I suspect the release of Codex Blood Angels in the later half of the year probably won't have hurt them either. Blood Angels players may be being tempted to get a few more jump packs on the board. They can be used as Death Company as well. They maybe feel like a little bit less vital at 90 points though, and wouldn't be too surprised if people aren't clamouring to get them as much as they were after the more later points updates. They certainly have been a popular unit to add recently though. Next up, we've got the Primaris Aggressors. These guys have also risen up a big 11 places higher than last time. I'm maybe not really too surprised to see these guys selling quite well for the Space Marines. Big fun chunky guys in Gravis armor with a whole bunch of fun damage and are quite good in a bunch of combos. They were good in Gladius with fire discipline, though far less so now. Firestorm could make good use of their flamers from within a transport, and Vanguard Spearhead could often have them infiltrating, maybe with Marnius Calgar. I feel like compared with the Jump Intercessors, I'm kind of surprised to see their sales surging more than them. Maybe there's a little bit of random chance at play there. They do strike me as the sort of Space Marine unit that's always going to be at least pretty popular, but maybe not any more in-game relevant towards the second half of 2024 compared with any of the others necessarily. So not too sure what might have caused a spike in their sales. In 7th place, and far more understandable to my mind, are the Tempestus Scions, previously not ranking on this list at all, but now being one of the top selling Warhammer kits in the second half of the year. The Astra Militarum Drop Elite unit have generally been good enough for the army as cheap units of objective grabbers, doing a little bit of damage with special weapons, though after some points and rules updates for the guard halfway through the year, their Born Soldiers change and a points cut turn them into a seriously nasty damage dealer unit, often dropping in with a Tempestus command squad also built from the same kit as a great big damage punch. I feel like it was very justifiable to add basically 3 copies of this kit with 10 Scions and a command squad, all dropping in and just annihilating their foes with special weapon fire. They could be very nasty with that, with their own buffs, plus any other ones that you could get from other units around. I kind of wonder if a few of them might have been pressed into service as a Tempestus Aquilons as well, given that they do look pretty similar, and they were thoroughly also included for the guard for a little bit, or whether or not a few late sales of them might have been due to the Bridgehead Strike army, where again, if you want to make that one work, you do need kind of an excessive amount of Scions. In any case, a whole ton of good reasons why guard players might have been adding some Stormtroopers to their armies. Next up, and in 6th place, we have the Land Raider Crusader or Redeemer. This one's actually gained more since last time around, rising up a further 3 places. Land Raiders in general have been a bit of a competitive staple for Space Marines in 10th edition, as mentioned for the Chaos one, just completely different to 9th edition where they had so many issues, but then both the assault ramp and the being able to shoot while in combat solved a bunch of problems for them, to the point where they actually work for the role that Games Workshop intended them for. Out of the variants as well, the Land Raider Redeemer with those scary flamestorm cannons has generally been considered the most competitive out of them, all due to the sheer amount of punchy overwatch that they can do, so it can transport things to the midboard, and then if anything moves around in front of it, it can toast them with an enormous amount of auto-hitting flamer fire. Again, they were frequently sold out in early 10th edition, so there might have been some delayed purchases into 2024. And they do feel a bit less likely to be retired than a bunch of the other firstborn armour. Things like Vindicators and Predators feel like they're on more shaky ground, whereas I think the general feeling is that Land Raiders are likely to stick around. Next up, and seemingly the single kit that's risen up the much in terms of sales, are the Deathcore of Krieg. With the excitement around the new Krieg launch, these guys have gone absolutely through the roof in terms of people wanting to pick some up, to the point where it looks like a few recent months worth of sales has them rivaling other things that have been on sale all year long. Technically, these guys did have a bit of a re-release, going away for a little bit and then having a new reincarnation as a kill team kit with some new counters in them. They were on sale for much of the rest of the year beforehand. I think there was just a lot of pent-up demand for that release, given that they'd announced Deathcore in the meantime. And these are the first Deathcore kits that you can actually get your hands on and start to build up if you want to collect an army of them. As a result, it looks like a whole load of guard collectors are looking to get a bunch of them painted up in the meantime, get the rank and file done, and then expand with the Death Riders and things that are coming out hopefully in January. I suspect that's where the vast majority of the demand is coming from, given that a bunch of the other kill teams have re-releases as well, but none of them featured on this list. And beyond that, they are generally considered quite nice models, a fairly well done kit with a ton of different options. In 4th place, we've got the Primaris Hellblasters, who rose up 3 places compared with last time, seeming to be some of the staple sellers from Games Workshop. Really quite fun Primaris with plasma guns, and have got a lot of good reasons for being a popular Space Marine unit. They're really easy to use with a bunch of plasma guns just being able to fry all sorts of different targets. They're fairly good against everything. They can be fast if they need to with the assault keyword, or get bonus damage if they're stationary, and compared with other units you get some consolation shots when they die, meaning that it's kind of hard to go too far wrong with them. Games Workshop also gave them a points decrease midway through 2024, which made them into a far nicer unit. And on top of all of that, they're also notably some of the best points per dollar that Space Marines can get. If you want to spend the least money and get the most points on the board, then 10-man squads of Hellblasters do that quite well. Plus they do just have the rule of cool factor of Space Marines with great big plasma guns. There's a lot to like. Next up, and in 3rd place, rising up a couple of places on last time, are the Crisis Battlesuits, the elite damage dealers of the Tau Empire, striking from the skies with fusion blasters, flamers and burst cannons and things. They're pretty much always some of the most iconic central units for the Tau Empire, lots of ones that people want to add to their army, and certainly a kit that you could add in many multiples if you wanted, perhaps particularly so at the moment given that their points went down quite a bit, so you could have loads of them in an army if desired, and still have room for lots of other stuff. In the Tau Codex they changed things around quite a bit, locking 3 different units to 3 different loadouts more or less, specialising in different targets. It does seem they've been at least fairly successful in making them interesting for different combos with commanders, which often tend to join them. I wouldn't be too surprised if they're a little bit less popular after the Retaliation Cadre nerf that they did, as that's often been one of the more popular places to play Tau, and the 3-inch deep strike going away was a bit of a big deal for them there. Overall though, still very popular miniatures, and the Tower are generally a popular faction in 40k as well. In second place, and rising up a touch from third last time, is the Land Raider. Again, I probably won't say too much more about this one. Land Raiders in general have been popular. 10th edition has been their time to shine, so a lot of people have picked one up once the shortages ran out. The standard Land Raider might be a touch overstated at Wargame Portal as well, given it's usually a direct online only one, but still shows that they're incredibly popular indeed, along with the rest of the variants. Finally though, and looking like the single most popular units to add to your army in Warhammer 40k in 2024, at least 4 kits that didn't have a big release in the edition, is the Space Marine Gladiator tank, a unit that maybe a whole bunch of people might have had their eye on and might have been happy to add to an army, but due to underwhelming rules in 9th edition they didn't really seem to pick up. In 10th edition though, in particular the Gladiator Lance has been one of the scariest anti-vehicle things in the Space Marine army. Really easy just to add in if you want to add some devastating anti-tank firepower that doesn't really need any other support, and a fair few lists have been deciding to run a pair of them for all their armor busting needs. The Reaper as well tends to be really quite popular in Ironstorm Spearhead, working quite well with a few of the combos there, maybe falling off a little bit since that was nerfed. I feel like it's highly likely to outcompete the sales of the Firstborn armor options of things like Vindicators, which now that Games Workshop have shifted the points around are pretty much equally good. I feel like a lot of people practically are kind of apprehensive about picking up too many Firstborn things, and these seem one that seem to be set for the future and Games Workshop won't remove. In any case though, despite a lot of competition, it still seems that the Gladiator tank retains its crown as the best-selling unit without a new release in 10th edition for the count of 2024. In any case, looking forward to hearing your thoughts as to Warhammer sales figures as normal. Are there any units that surprised you as to how high up they were here, or ones that you expected to be here that weren't? Look forward to hearing all your thoughts down in the comments. As mentioned earlier, a massive thank you to Wargame Portal for providing the data for this one, and also supporting the channel with affiliate sales and everything. As ever, if you're in the USA and want to pick up some expensive plastic models at a discount, feel free to check them out. They generally have a good reputation, and a link's down in the video description. In any case though, I'll leave that one there for now. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page too. You can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. And channel patrons do get a few advantages, seeing certain videos early, occasional votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways. If any of that sounds interesting, or you'd just like to help keep the videos coming, feel free to check out the link in the video description. In any case though, an absolutely massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.